He looked into my eyes, in front of my entire family, and said the words that haunt me to this day. "Your mother kisses better than you." In that moment, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Hello, dear viewers. My name is Eleanor. I'm 78 years old today, and I'm going to share for the first time the story that completely changed the course of my life. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you watching now to please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This helps me continue sharing my stories with you all. You've become like family to me now. It was 1962. I was only 19 when I married Robert. I still remember my wedding dress, sewn by my own mother, Clara. I was the happiest young woman in our neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. Back then, marrying young was every respectable girl's dream, and Robert, at 24, was considered quite a catch. He worked as an accountant at a large company, drove a navy blue Chevy, and came from a respected family. We met at the church's 4th of July picnic. He asked me to dance, and when our eyes met during that first slow dance, something inside me already knew he would be the man I'd spend my life with. How wrong I was. My God, how wrong I was. The first years of marriage were like a dream. We bought a simple but cozy house on Maple Street. We furnished it little by little with great sacrifice. Each new piece of furniture was celebrated as a major achievement. Then came the children. Charles was born in 1964 and Beatrice in 1966. Our family seemed perfect in everyone's eyes. Robert was a good father, at least in the beginning. He played with the children when he came home from work, told them bedtime stories, took us to the park on Sundays. He wasn't very expressive with his feelings. Men of that era rarely were. But he showed his love in other ways, working hard so we wouldn't want for anything, caring about the children's schooling, making plans for the future. Our routine was simple but happy. I took care of the house and children, did small sewing jobs to supplement our income. Robert left early for work and returned in the late afternoon. We had dinner together and talked about our day. Sometimes, when the children were already asleep, we sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the night and dreaming about what we would do when the children grew up, when we had more money, when life became easier. In 1968, my father died of a sudden heart attack. It was a terrible blow for all of us, but especially for my mother. They had been companions for 30 years. Clara, at 50, found herself alone for the first time in her adult life. She became so depressed that she began to waste away before our eyes. She lost weight daily and barely got out of bed. Robert was the one who suggested, "Eleanor, your mother can't stay alone in that big house. Why don't we bring her to live with us?" At the time, I thought it was the noblest gesture my husband could have made. Today, I know his intentions were far from noble. We prepared the small back room for my mother. It was small but welcoming, with a window overlooking the backyard where we had a cherry tree. Gradually, she recovered from her depression. She started taking care of herself again, cooking those wonderful dishes that only she knew how to make, smiling again. Robert and she would spend hours talking on the porch while I took care of the children and the house. Every night I thanked God for having such an attentive husband to my mother. It seemed like a perfect arrangement. My mother helped with the children and the house, easing my daily burden somewhat. Robert seemed to appreciate her company. After all, my mother was a cultured woman who read a lot and always had interesting topics to discuss, unlike me, who had barely finished high school. And the children loved having their grandmother around, always with a sweet hidden in her apron pocket, always willing to tell one more story before bedtime. It was in late 1969 that I began to notice small changes. Details that in isolation seemed insignificant, but together formed a disturbing picture. My mother, who had always been modest in her dress, began wearing brighter lipsticks, tighter dresses, and perfumed herself more frequently. Robert, in turn, started coming home earlier from work. He, who used to complain when he had to come back home, now made up excuses not to go out with friends on weekends. I clearly remember one afternoon when I returned early from the grocery store. Entering the kitchen, I saw my mother and Robert talking very closely. When they saw me, They quickly moved apart. My mother nervously dropped a cup. "We were just planning a surprise for your birthday," explained Robert with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I believed him, of course, or rather, I forced myself to believe. Who would imagine that one's own husband and mother would be capable of such betrayal? It was unthinkable, unimaginable. So I ignored that pang of suspicion, that instinct telling me something was wrong. But other things started happening. Robert, who never cared much about appearances, began dressing better, using more cologne. My mother, who had always been an early riser, started sleeping later, saying she hadn't slept well at night. The two seemed to have private jokes, references I didn't understand. "I'll help your mother organize the old photos," Robert would say. "I'll teach your husband how to fix the radio," my mother would explain. And I, fool that I was, believed, or perhaps deep down, I didn't want to believe the truth that was already unfolding before my eyes. There was one particular episode that made me more suspicious. It was Robert's birthday, and I had planned a small surprise. A chocolate cake, his favorite, and a gift I had saved for months to buy, a new watch. I left the store where I worked part-time earlier, eager to prepare everything before he arrived. When I entered the house, I heard laughter coming from my mother's room. The door was ajar. Robert was sitting on her bed, and my mother was rubbing cream into his hands. "Your hands are so rough," she was saying in a voice she had never used with me. "A man needs to take better care of himself." He smiled, that smile that used to be only mine. "You spoil me too much, Clara." I cleared my throat loudly, announcing my presence. They both turned, surprised. No one mentioned the birthday. That night, when I presented the cake and the gift, Robert seemed embarrassed, as if he had completely forgotten it was his birthday. My mother didn't appear for dinner, claiming she had a headache. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was wrong. I felt it in the air, in the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I started noticing other signs. The hands that touched discreetly when passing the salt during dinner, the whispers that ceased when I entered the room, the excuses to be alone. I worked part-time at a clothing store downtown to help with household expenses. The children were in school. Normally, my mother would pick them up and stay with them until I returned. But I began to notice that on some days it was Robert who appeared to pick them up, saying Clara wasn't feeling well. Over time, my suspicion only grew. I began paying more attention, observing patterns. I noticed that on certain days of the week, my mother always had some commitment outside the house at the same time Robert took time off work. Coincidence? Maybe. But my heart said no. I tried to talk to my best friend Louise about my suspicions. She looked at me as if I had gone crazy. "Your mother and your husband? Eleanor, you're reading too many romance novels. How absurd, woman. Your mother is old enough to be his mother. And she's your mother, for God's sake. Get that crazy idea out of your head." And I tried, I swear I tried. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was seeing things that didn't exist. After all, what woman suspects her own mother? What wife imagines that her husband would be capable of betraying her with her mother-in-law? But the signs continued. A letter I found by chance, written in my mother's handwriting, unsigned, speaking of forbidden feelings, of secret meetings. A lipstick that wasn't mine in Robert's shirt pocket. The smell of her perfume on him when he returned from a supposed happy hour with work colleagues. In a desperate attempt to prove to myself that I was wrong, I began setting small traps. I would say I was going out, but return minutes later. I'd invent non-existent appointments to see how they would react when they thought they were alone. I even went so far as to ask Louise to call the house at random times to see who would answer and what they would say. With each little test, my suspicions only grew. The two seemed more at ease when I wasn't around. There was an intimacy between them that went beyond the normal relationship between son-in-law and mother-in-law. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, I knew, deep down, that something very wrong was happening right under my roof. One day, I decided to follow my mother when she said she was going to the doctor. Robert, coincidentally, had also taken the afternoon off, claiming fatigue. I watched my mother leave, waited a few minutes, and discreetly followed her. To my surprise, she didn't go to the doctor's office downtown as she had said. Instead, she took a bus to a distant neighborhood, got off in front of a small motel, and went in. I stayed across the street, my heart beating so hard I thought I might faint. 20 minutes later, I saw Robert arriving, looking around as if afraid of being recognized and entering the same motel. I returned home dazed, my legs weak, my mind a whirlwind. There was no more denying what was happening. The betrayal I had feared so much, which seemed so absurd, so unthinkable, was real. My own husband and my own mother were having an affair. That night, when the two returned, separately of course, with a few hours' difference, I acted normally. I served dinner, chatted about trivialities, put the children to bed, but inside me, something had changed forever. The naive and trusting Eleanor had died that day. In her place was born a woman who would never be made a fool of again. But I still didn't have concrete proof, just strong suspicions and some evidence. Part of me still wanted to believe I was wrong, that there was an innocent explanation for all of this, and the other part, the one that already knew the truth, wanted incontestable proof before confronting them. Proof that no one could deny or explain away. On a rainy Friday in March 1970, the store owner needed to close early because of a leak in the roof. I returned home around 3 p.m, soaked and irritated with the downpour that had ruined my only good pair of shoes. The house seemed empty when I entered. I called for my mother, for Robert, but no one answered. I found it strange, since his car was in the garage. I went to my mother's room, empty. I climbed the stairs toward our bedroom, mine and Robert's. The door was ajar. Even before reaching the top of the stairs, I heard those sounds that a woman recognizes. Muffled giggles, whispers, the unmistakable creaking of our bed. What would happen next would change my life forever. Now, let's continue from where we left off. That rainy Friday that changed everything. I climbed the stairs with my heart in my hand. Each step seemed heavier than the last. The sounds became clearer as I approached our bedroom. The creaking of the bed, muffled giggles, whispers. Part of me wanted to turn back, leave that house, pretend I had never heard anything. But another part, stronger, needed to see with my own eyes. I needed the definitive confirmation that would end any doubt. I pushed the door slowly. What I saw was etched in my memory forever, like a photograph from hell. There they were, in my bed, between the sheets I had so lovingly embroidered for our marriage. My mother in my husband's arms, both so engrossed they didn't even notice my presence. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, unable to speak, to scream, to move. An icy sensation ran through my body from head to toe. It was as if the whole world had stopped, as if everything around disappeared, and only that horrible scene remained before my eyes. I don't know how long I stood there watching. It could have been a second or an eternity. Then, slowly, without making a sound, I closed the door and went down the stairs. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange calm came over me. A calm that came from shock, from disbelief, from the feeling that this couldn't be real, that I must be having a terrible nightmare from which I would soon awake. I grabbed my purse and left the house. The rain continued to fall, strong and cold, soaking my clothes, my hair, my soul. I walked down the street with no direction, not feeling the water running down my face. I couldn't tell if they were tears or raindrops, probably both. I walked for hours, traversing streets I knew well, but which now seemed strange, different, as if I had entered a parallel world where nothing made sense anymore. How could my own mother do this to me? The woman who gave me life, who should protect me, love me unconditionally. And Robert, the man to whom I had given everything, my youth, my body, my trust, my children. When I finally returned home, it was already night. I was soaked, trembling, physically and emotionally exhausted. They were in the living room as if nothing had happened. Robert reading the newspaper, my mother knitting. The The children were already asleep. "Where were you? You're soaked," asked Robert with false concern. "I went for a walk," I answered in a voice that didn't seem like mine. "In all this rain? You'll catch pneumonia, dear," said my mother, getting up to fetch a towel. Their hypocrisy made me nauseous. "I'm fine," I cut her off, heading to the bathroom. "I'll take a hot shower." I locked myself in the bathroom and finally alone let the tears come. I cried silently, with the shower water disguising my sobs. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the shattered trust, for the future that now seemed so uncertain. But mainly I cried from anger. An anger that grew inside me, fueled by humiliation, by betrayal, by the contempt with which they had treated my feelings. That night, lying next to Robert, I pretended to sleep while planning each step of what I would do next. I would not be impulsive. I would not give them the pleasure of seeing me crumble. I would be calculating, cold, patient. I would wait for the perfect moment to expose the truth, to make them pay for what they had done. For 3 long months, I kept my secret. I continued preparing breakfast for them, washing and ironing their clothes, smiling when necessary. Meanwhile, I observed, kept evidence, the letters I found hidden in a shoebox in my mother's closet, the entries in her diary that I read secretly when she went out, the motel receipts I found in the pocket of Robert's suit. I began hiding money in a cookie tin at the back of the kitchen cabinet. I knew the time would come when I would need it. I asked for overtime at the store. I started doing sewing work at home. Every penny was saved with the same care with which I had once kept my hopes and dreams. Robert and my mother continued their affair, becoming increasingly careless, as if they were sure I would never discover them, or perhaps believing that even if I did, I wouldn't have the courage to do anything about it. How wrong they were. My mother's 45th birthday would be in June. I proposed to throw a party. Something special, I said, to celebrate her new phase. Robert thought it was a great idea. My mother was radiant. Neither of them imagined that this would be my revenge. I planned every detail meticulously. I invited the whole family, my aunts and uncles, cousins, Robert's brothers, close friends, neighbors, people from the church. I didn't want random witnesses. I wanted people who knew our family, who respected us, who would be as shocked as I had been. I prepared everything with obsessive care. The 3-tiered cake, the snacks, the decoration with wildflowers, her favorites. I dressed the children in their Sunday best. I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, to take care of them during the party, bringing them to her house to play after we sang Happy Birthday. I didn't want them to witness what was to come. I myself put on my best dress, applied red lipstick, pinned up my hair, looked at myself in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. There was a determination in my eyes, a hardness that had never been there before. The naive girl who married at 19 had completely disappeared. The party started like any other. Guests arriving, greetings, pleasant conversations, music playing softly. My mother was radiant, wearing a new dress, turquoise blue, which I knew Robert had given her. I had found the receipt in his pocket. Robert circulated among the guests, charming as always, the perfect host. When all the guests were present, I asked for attention to make a toast. Silence fell over the room. I held a glass of wine that I hadn't touched. My hands weren't trembling, although my heart was beating like a drum. "I want to thank everyone for being here on this special day," I began. "My mother's birthday is always an occasion to celebrate, but this year we have something else to celebrate. A new union in the family." I saw the confused looks, saw my mother's smile falter, saw Robert turn pale. 3 months ago, I continued with a firm voice, I discovered that my husband and my mother are having an affair. I found them in my marital bed. The shock was like a wave. I heard muffled exclamations. I saw hands covering mouths open in astonishment. My Aunt Cecilia dropped her plate of sweets. Robert's older brother stood up, his face red with indignation. "You're crazy," shouted Robert desperately. "No one will believe you." But I was prepared. I took from my purse the letters, the diary, the evidence I had patiently collected. I threw everything on the table before the wide eyes of the guests. "Here are the love letters my mother wrote to my husband," I said, throwing the crumpled papers on the table. "Here are the receipts from the motels where they met when they thought I was working." My mother began to cry, a hysterical cry, begging for forgiveness. "Eleanor, dear, it's not what it seems. We didn't want to hurt you." "Don't call me dear," I cut her off coldly. "A mother doesn't do what you did." Robert, seeing himself cornered, opted for attack. His face contorted with rage came in my direction, pointing his finger in my face. "So what? What are you going to do? Do you think you can survive without me? Who will want a used woman with 2 children to raise? You are nothing without me, Eleanor. Nothing." That's when he shouted that phrase, those cruel words I never forgot. "Your mother kisses better than you. She's always been better than you at everything." The entire room froze. A deathly silence fell over all those present. Then, as if a dam had broken, chaos ensued. My Uncle Joseph, my late father's brother, rose like an enraged bull and punched Robert in the face. "You bastard! My brother entrusted his daughter to you!" My cousins grabbed Robert before he could react and dragged him outside, throwing him into the street like the trash he was. I could hear his shouts from outside, empty threats, curses. My mother, humiliated before everyone, ran to her room. Minutes later, she came out with a small suitcase and left our house forever. She didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. I learned years later that she went to live with a distant cousin in Portland. We never spoke again. The guests started leaving, embarrassed, murmuring words of support, or simply avoiding my gaze. Some stayed longer, offering practical help. My Aunt Cecilia offered to stay a few days to help with the children. My cousin Anthony said he would talk to a lawyer friend about divorce, something rare and scandalous at that time, but necessary. By late afternoon, the house was almost empty. I went to get the children from Mrs. Johnson's house. They were oblivious to everything, happy to have played all afternoon. The contrast between their innocence and the horror of what had happened made my heart ache. How would I explain to them that their father and grandmother had gone away? How could I protect them from the truth without lying? That night, as I put Charles and Beatrice to bed, Charles, with his 6 years and the wisdom that only children have, asked, "Mommy, where did Daddy go?" "He needed to leave, my son," I replied, swallowing tears. "Will he come back?" "I don't know, dear, but don't worry. Mommy is here and will never leave you." It was a promise I kept with all my strength in the difficult years that followed. That night was the longest of my life. Alone in the bed I had once shared with Robert, I cried until I had no more tears. I cried for lost love, for destroyed trust, for the shattered family, but mostly I cried for myself, for the woman I had been and would never be again. When the sun rose, I got up determined. The crying was over. Now it was time to act, to rebuild, to survive. I looked at the clock, 6 a.m. The children were still sleeping. I sat at the kitchen table and began making calculations, plans, lists. We had savings, very little. Robert controlled the finances with an iron fist. I had only what I had hidden in the cookie tin, perhaps enough for a month of basic expenses. Work. I had my part-time job at the store, but the salary would barely cover the rent. I would need something more, overtime, perhaps a second job. The rented house with the contract in Robert's name. I didn't know if I could keep it on my own, nor if I wanted to continue there with so many bad memories. The children would need to change schools probably. The current one was too expensive for my new budget. How would I explain to them? How would I protect them from the malicious comments that would inevitably come? The morning advanced, and with it grew my determination. It wouldn't be easy. None of this would be easy. But I would survive, for myself, for my children, for the woman I could still become. 3 days after the party, Robert showed up at the house. He was sober, presentable, with an expression that tried to appear repentant. He asked to talk. Reluctantly, I let him in. "Eleanor, I made a terrible mistake," he began, sitting on the edge of the sofa, his restless hands on his knees. "I don't know what came over me. Your mother, she seduced me, manipulated me. She was vulnerable after your father died and—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear you blame my mother as if you were an innocent victim. You're a grown man, Robert. You made your choices. But we can start over," he insisted, a tone of desperation in his voice. "For the kids, they need their father. They need a father who respects them, who respects their mother. You are not that man." He changed tactics, his true nature beginning to show. "You'll never make it alone, Eleanor. You don't have money, you don't have education, you don't have family to support you. In a month, you'll be begging me to come back." "I'd rather starve under a bridge than live one more day with you," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. He got up angrily. "You'll regret this. I'll take everything from you, the house, the children, everything. I have lawyer friends, I have money." "What do you have?" "I have dignity," I replied simply. "Something you would never understand." After he left, slamming the door hard, I felt a mixture of fear and relief. Fear of what lay ahead, of the threats he might carry out. Relief at finally being free of that failed marriage, of that lie we were living. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Robert fulfilled some of his threats. He completely cut off the money, took the car, emptied our joint bank account, but other empty promises proved to be just bluffs. He didn't fight for custody of the children. In fact, he seemed relieved not to have to deal with them. He didn't show up with expensive lawyers. It seems his financial situation wasn't as solid as he boasted. I had to make difficult decisions, one after another. We moved to a smaller apartment in a more distant neighborhood where the rent fit my tight budget. I transferred the children to a public school, which surprisingly turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as they found loyal friends and dedicated teachers there. I started sewing at home, in addition to my work at the store. Small repairs at first, then simple dresses, school uniforms, whatever came up. I worked late into the night after the children were asleep. I woke up before sunrise to prepare breakfast, get the children ready, organize the house. They were exhausting days, short nights, constant worries, but there were also moments of unexpected joy. Charles learning to ride a bike without training wheels, Beatrice reciting her first poem at school. The neighbors who gradually became a support network, bringing a cake, offering to stay with the children when I needed to work late. 6 months after the separation, I received an unexpected call. It was Mrs. Helen, the owner of the store where I worked. "Eleanor," she said, with that hoarse voice of someone who has smoked all her life, "I need to talk to you. Can you come to my office tomorrow before the store opens?" I spent the whole night awake, worried. Would I lose my job? I couldn't afford that luxury. Not now. When I arrived at the small office at the back of the store, Mrs. Helen was sitting behind her desk, smoking a cigarette, as always. She was 60, had been a widow longer than I had been alive, and commanded her small empire of clothing stores with an iron fist. "Sit down, girl," she said, indicating the chair in front of her. "I've been observing your work these past few months. You're good, you know? You have an eye for fashion, you're polite with customers, you're reliable." "Thank you, Mrs. Helen," I replied, still apprehensive. "I hear you sew, that you make clothes at home." I froze. Would she consider this a kind of unfair competition? "Yes, ma'am, to supplement my income. I have 2 small children." She raised her hand, interrupting me. "You don't need to explain. In fact, that's why I called you here. I want to see your work. Bring some pieces tomorrow." The next day, I took 3 dresses I had recently made. Simple but well finished, with details that made them special. An embroidery here, a different finish there. "Mrs." Helen examined each piece meticulously with the critical eye of someone who had been in the business for decades. Then she lit another cigarette and stared at me for a long moment. "I have a proposal for you, Eleanor. I'm thinking of launching the store's own line. Nothing too ambitious at first, just a few exclusive pieces. I'd like you to design and sew the models." I was speechless, my heart racing. It was an opportunity I had never imagined. "I don't know what to say, Mrs. Helen. I don't have training in design. I never—" "Training?" she interrupted with a hoarse laugh. "Girl, half the seamstresses in Paris never set foot in a fashion school. What matters is talent, and you have it. The rest you learn by doing." Thus began a new phase of my life. I continued working at the store during the day, but now with expanded responsibilities. At night at home, I designed and sewed the models for the exclusive line. It was exhausting, but exhilarating. For the first time since the separation, I felt I was building something, not just surviving. The small collection was a modest but significant success. The store's most loyal customers loved the idea of exclusive pieces that no one else would have. Mrs. Helen, always astute in business, slightly increased the prices of these pieces, arguing that exclusivity has its value. And it did. We sold everything in less than a month. With the success of the first collection came an increase in my salary, and more importantly, an increase in my confidence. I began to dream bigger, to plan beyond immediate survival. Maybe, with time and hard work, I could have my own atelier one day. Maybe I could give Charles and Beatrice the life they deserved, not just the basics to survive. Life went on, one day after another. It wasn't easy, but it was mine, my choice, my path, my reconstruction. From the ashes of betrayal began a new Eleanor, stronger, wiser, more determined. The first years after the separation were the most difficult of my life. 1971 arrived with challenges I never imagined facing: raising 2 small children alone, working to support the household, dealing with the stigma of being a separated woman at a time when that was almost a scandal. Each day seemed like a battle. Charles, at 7, became strangely serious for his age, as if he suddenly felt the responsibility of being the man of the house. He worried about me, asked if I needed help, stayed up late waiting for me when I had to work the night shift at the store. It broke my heart to see a child carrying a weight that should have been mine alone. Beatrice, at just 5, reacted differently. She started having nightmares, waking up crying in the middle of the night, calling for her father, for her grandmother. How do you explain to a small child that the 2 people who should love her unconditionally had abandoned her by their own choice? We now lived in a small apartment in Queens. 2 bedrooms, a tiny living room, a kitchen that barely fit the table where we ate. It was far from being a dream home, but I managed to make it cozy with the little we had. Colorful curtains I sewed with scraps, decorated cushions, flowers collected on the way back from work. My routine was exhausting. I woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast, get the children ready, take them to school. I worked at Mrs. Helen's store from 8 to 5. Then I rushed to pick up the children from the neighbor who looked after them after school. At night, after they were asleep, I sewed until dawn, both the models for the store and extra orders I managed to get. I slept 4, maybe 5 hours a night. There were days when the exhaustion was so great that I cried while sewing, tears blurring my vision, my fingers sore from working so much. But there was no luxury of stopping. There was no one to help me if I faltered. Robert completely disappeared after our last discussions. No alimony, no visits, no news, as if Charles and Beatrice had never existed for him. The children asked about their father at first, especially Beatrice. With time, the questions became rarer until they ceased completely. It was as if we had always been just the 3 of us. The exclusive line I designed for Mrs. Helen's store began to gain recognition. Customers came from other neighborhoods specifically to see Eleanor's creations. They weren't haute couture pieces, nothing so pretentious. They were dresses, skirts, blouses, well made, with special touches that made them unique, without being too expensive. In mid-1971, Mrs. Helen called me to her office again. "Eleanor," she said, lighting her eternal cigarette, "I'm thinking of expanding, opening a second store downtown. I want you to manage the place. I was breathless. A store manager? Me, who had barely finished high school? It was an incredible opportunity, but also frightening. I don't know if I have enough experience, Mrs. Helen, I confessed. She blew out a puff of smoke and stared at me with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see through people. Experience? Girl, you survived a cheating husband, a disloyal mother, you're raising 2 children alone, and yet you still manage to smile at customers every day. That's more life experience than many executives out there have. I accepted the proposal, of course. The salary was almost double, and the more flexible schedule would allow me to spend more time with the children. The new store opened in August, small but well located, near Union Square. Besides managing the space, I continued designing and sewing the exclusive models, now with the help of 2 seamstresses we hired. It was a period of intense growth, both professional and personal. I learned about management, finances, marketing, all in practice, day by day. I made mistakes, of course, but Mrs. Helen was a patient mentor in her rough and direct way. "Isn't it by making mistakes that we learn?" she would say when I despaired over some stumble. Just don't stumble over the same stone twice. At the end of 1971, I was finally able to move to a better apartment, still rented, but more spacious, in a safer neighborhood. Charles and Beatrice would have separate rooms. There was a small balcony where I put potted plants, and most importantly, it was close to a public school with a good reputation. The move coincided with Christmas, our second Christmas alone. The previous year, we hardly had a celebration. I was so busy trying to survive that the date passed almost unnoticed. But now, with our situation a little more stable, I decided we deserved to celebrate. I saved for months to buy simple but meaningful gifts for the children. For Charles, a used bicycle that I secretly refurbished, painting it blue, his favorite color. For Beatrice, a porcelain doll I found at a thrift store. It wasn't new, but it was in perfect condition, with blue eyes that opened and closed, exactly as she had dreamed. I prepared a modest but tasty dinner. I invited 2 neighbors who were also single mothers, Judy, with her 10-year-old twins, and Sandra, with a girl Beatrice's age. We decorated the house together, improvising ornaments with what we had. We made a small tree with dried branches painted white, decorated with balls of colored paper that the children helped make. It was a simple night, but full of genuine joy. The children playing, us adults talking, sharing experiences, giving strength to each other. Looking at that table, at those people that life had put in my path, I felt a wave of gratitude. It wasn't the family I had dreamed of when I was young, but it was a family all the same, built with choices, with affinities, with mutual support. 1972 arrived, bringing new challenges and opportunities. The downtown store was doing so well that Mrs. Helen started talking about opening a 3rd unit. My exclusive creations were now the trademark of the stores. Customers specifically asked for them. Some even placed custom orders. In March, I received an unexpected call. It was Robert. After almost 2 years without news, without contributing a cent to the raising of his children, now he wanted to see them. "The kids miss you," he said, as if that justified his prolonged absence. I took a deep breath before answering. "The children missed you for a long time, Robert. Where were you when Charles cried at night, when Beatrice had nightmares, when we needed money for medicine, for school supplies?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then his voice, less arrogant than I remembered. "I know I made mistakes, Eleanor, many mistakes, but they're my children. I have the right to see them." He was right, as much as it pained me to admit. They were his children too. They had a right to a father, even if he was an absent and flawed father. "You can see them on Sunday," I conceded, "here at home, in my presence. If you mention one word about that matter or try to turn them against me, you'll never set foot in this house again." The reunion was difficult. Charles, then 8, refused to hug his father. He stood still, his little arms crossed over his chest, staring at the floor. Beatrice, on the other hand, ran into Robert's arms as soon as she saw him, making my heart tighten with fear and jealousy. What if he decided to take her away? What if she preferred her father to the mother who was killing herself, working to support them? Robert tried to win the children back with gifts. A soccer ball for Charles, a doll for Beatrice. Gifts that I could never buy at that time. I saw in his eyes a mixture of regret and manipulation. He wasn't there just for the children. He was testing the waters, seeing if there was a chance to come back home now that his life had crumbled. "Eleanor," he said when the children went to play in the yard, "I made the worst mistake of my life. Your mother, she seduced me, bewitched me. I wasn't in my right mind." I looked at that man whom I had once loved with all the strength of my being and felt nothing, no hatred, no love, no hurt, just a great emptiness. "Robert," I replied calmly, "you can visit your children on Sundays. You can even help with their expenses if you want to be a decent father. But between us two, it's over. There's no going back." He tried to argue, beg, threaten. He said I would never manage to raise the children alone, that no decent man would accept me as a wife after the scandal, that I needed him. I stood firm. When he finally left, I closed the door and leaned my back against it, exhausted. It was the first battle of many that would still come. Robert's Sunday visits became an irregular routine. Sometimes he appeared 3 weeks in a row, then disappeared for months. He never contributed financially, always with excuses. He was unemployed, he had debts, he needed the money to rent a decent room so he could eventually receive the children there, something that never happened. Meanwhile, my small dressmaking business grew little by little. In September 1972, I managed to rent a tiny commercial space on Madison Avenue. It was no longer just me sewing at the kitchen table after the children were asleep. Now I had my own space, modest, but mine. I hired my first employee, Marlene, a widowed lady with nimble fingers and an eagle eye for details. Until then, I did all kinds of sewing, from simple repairs to party dresses. But with Marlene, I could concentrate on what I really liked. Creating, designing clothes became my passion and my therapy. While imagining new models, new cuts, new details, I managed to momentarily forget all the difficulties, all the wounds still open. I remember working late after Marlene left. The children did homework at the small table at the back of the store, ate snacks I prepared in the morning. It was a hard life, but we were together. We were moving forward. 1973 was the year I met Anthony. He was a representative of a textile mill from upstate. He came to New York every 2 weeks with samples of new fabrics. The first time he entered my store, I thought he was just another salesman. "I don't need anything today, thank you," I said without raising my eyes from the dress I was adjusting. "You should at least look," he insisted with a deep and calm voice that made me raise my head. "I brought some Italian silks that would do justice to your talent." That phrase, "your talent," moved me. How long had it been since anyone recognized my effort, my work? It was always, "Poor Eleanor, abandoned by her husband. Eleanor who manages alone with the children." Never Eleanor, the talented seamstress. I asked him to show me the samples, and he was right. They were wonderful silks in colors I rarely saw in the local market. We talked about fabrics, about trends, about the difficulty of finding quality materials at accessible prices. It was a purely professional conversation, but there was something comforting in the way he spoke to me. With respect, without condescension, as equals. Anthony was 42, had been a widower for 5 years. His wife had died of cancer, leaving him with a daughter who lived with her maternal grandmother in Albany. He traveled selling fabrics throughout New York State, a solitary life that, according to him, had its compensations. I get to know interesting places and people, like you, for example. I placed my first order with him that day. A modest quantity of petrol blue silk and an Egyptian cotton that would be perfect for the men's shirts I was planning to include in the next collection. He promised to deliver personally the following week, which I found strange at the time. Commercial representatives usually left that to the delivery men. When he returned with my order, he also brought a book. I noticed you have some fashion books on the shelf, he said, a little embarrassed. I found this in a used bookstore in Albany. I thought it might interest you. It was an old book about the history of French fashion with wonderful illustrations. A simple gift, but incredibly thoughtful. I was speechless for a moment. You didn't need to bother, I finally managed to say. It was no bother at all, he replied with a discreet smile. It's good to have excuses to return to interesting places. Our relationship started strictly professional. He brought me the best silks, the most beautiful Egyptian cottons, always with a fair price and payment conditions that fit in my tight budget. Gradually, conversations about fabrics and fashion trends transformed into conversations about books we read, movies we watched, dreams we had. One day he arrived with a book of poems by Robert Frost. I thought of you when I read this poem, he said, pointing to a marked page. It was The Road Not Taken. I was so touched, I almost cried right there in front of him. No one had given me such a personal gift in years. Anthony was kind to the children. He always brought a chocolate, a comic book, a small souvenir from the cities he passed through. Charles, always suspicious of men after his father's departure, began to anxiously await the visits of the fabric man, as he called him. Beatrice bombarded him with questions about the places he visited, fascinated by the stories of cities she only knew from school books. On a hot afternoon in January 1974, after closing a large order for Valentine's Day, Anthony invited me for coffee. I automatically refused. I have to pick up the children at the neighbor's house, prepare dinner, review their homework. Mrs. Eleanor, he interrupted with that calm smile. It's not a marriage proposal, just a coffee. Half an hour of your time. The children can wait 30 more minutes. Something in that smile disarmed me. I accepted the coffee, which extended for almost 2 hours of easy conversation and laughter. How long had it been since I had laughed like that? I returned home light, as if a weight had been temporarily lifted from my shoulders. The coffees became more frequent. Then came a Sunday lunch with the children, a movie the following month, a visit to Central Park on a holiday. Anthony entered our lives slowly, respecting our time, our traumas, our space. When Robert found out through the children that there was a man visiting us, he came furiously to the store. He was drunk, his eyes bloodshot, shouting that I was a loose woman, that I was setting a bad example for his children, that no decent man would accept me knowing of my shame. I had to call the police to remove him. It was the last time Charles agreed to see his father for a long time. After this episode, Anthony was even more careful. I don't want to cause problems for you and the children, he said. We can go slower or stop if you prefer. I've been too slow all my life, I replied, always doing what others expected of me. Now I want to follow my heart for the first time. At the end of 1974, Anthony asked me to be his girlfriend formally. It wasn't in a fancy restaurant, nor with flowers or expensive gifts. It was in my own living room after the children had gone to bed. We were listening to a Frank Sinatra record, drinking cheap but nice wine, when he held my hands. Eleanor, I'm not a rich or extraordinary man. I'm just a fabric salesman with a teenage daughter and a simple life to offer. But if you accept me, I promise never to hurt you, never to betray your trust, and to love your children as if they were my own. I hesitated, not because I didn't feel the same, but out of fear. The fear of trusting again, of getting hurt, of seeing my children suffer another loss. What if it doesn't work? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Then we'll have tried, he replied simply. But I think it will work, Eleanor. You know why? Because you're no longer that 19-year-old girl who got married thinking that love was a fairy tale. And I'm not an immature young man who confuses passion with true love. We've lived. We've suffered. We already know what truly matters. And so, 4 years after the greatest betrayal of my life, I allowed myself to believe in love again. Not a blind, idealized love, like what I felt for Robert in my youth, but a mature, realistic love, built on foundations of mutual respect, honesty, and conscious choice. Anthony asked to speak with the children the next day, a Saturday. Charles was then 10, Beatrice 8. He called them to the kitchen table as if it were a business meeting. Serious, formal, respectful. "I'm asking your permission to date your mother," he said. "This means I'll be more present in your lives. I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace your father. He will always be your father. I'm just asking for a place in your family if you'll accept me." Charles, with the precocious maturity that life had imposed on him, asked the question that burned in his chest. "Will you make my mother cry like my father did?" Anthony extended his hand to him in a man-to-man gesture. "If I ever make her cry from sadness, you have my permission to punch me, young man." Beatrice, always more emotional, asked, "Do you really like Mom, or are you just pretending?" "I like her so much that sometimes it hurts in here," Anthony replied, pointing to his chest. "It's a different kind of pain, a good pain that comes when you truly love someone." The children exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that only siblings can have. Then Charles nodded. "Fine," he said seriously. "You can date our mother, but if you make her suffer, I know—" "A well-placed punch," Anthony smiled. "I know." That's how we started our story, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with honesty, respect, and feet firmly planted in reality. Anthony wasn't a knight in shining armor coming to save me. I had already saved myself. He was a companion to walk by my side, making the road a little less lonely, a little more joyful. Our dating with Anthony advanced with the same calm and firmness that characterized that man. No rushing, no impulses. Each step was thought out, always considering the impact on the children. He understood that he wasn't just winning a woman, he was gaining the trust of a family fragile from deep trauma. In mid-1975, Anthony surprised me with a proposal. His daughter, Marianne, then 16, was unhappy living with her grandmother in Albany. The lady was getting old, having difficulties keeping up with a teenager. "I'm thinking of bringing her to New York," he said during one of our quiet dinners after the children were asleep. "Renting a bigger apartment where we can live together." That proposal caught me off guard. It was a big step, not just dating, but sharing a home, uniting our families. I was afraid. What if the children didn't adapt? What if Marianne rejected me? What if we ended up repeating past mistakes? "I need to think," I replied honestly. "It's not just my decision. I need to talk to Charles and Beatrice." Anthony respected my time, didn't pressure, didn't insist, just said, "When you're ready, if you're ready, I'll be here." I talked with the children that same night after dinner. Charles, always more cautious, asked if this meant Anthony would be his new father. "No one will replace your biological father," I explained. "But we can have different types of family, different people who love us and care for us." Beatrice was more excited about the idea of having an older sister. She already imagined Marianne teaching her how to put on makeup, lending clothes, sharing secrets. She had that idealization that only children can have. After a week of conversations, prayers, and reflections, I accepted Anthony's proposal with one condition. We would take it slow. First, Marianne would visit us for a few weekends so everyone could get to know each other better. If all went well, then we would think about the next step. I remember the first meeting between Marianne and my children. She was a pretty teenager, with long brown hair and dark eyes like her father's, but she carried on her face a seriousness that didn't match her youth. In the first few minutes, she remained silent, observing everything with suspicion. Beatrice, eager to make friends, talked nonstop, showing her toys, her school books. Charles kept his distance, studying the situation. During lunch, Marianne finally spoke. "My father said you lost your husband." I choked on the rice. I didn't expect such a direct approach. "Not exactly," I replied after catching my breath. "We separated. He took a different path. My mother died," she said with that brutal teenage honesty. "I'd prefer she had gone away by choice. At least she would still be alive somewhere." That phrase hit me like a punch. For the first time, I was able to see beyond my own pain. I realized there were different types of loss, different types of absence. Mine was marked by betrayal, hers by fatality. Both painful, both definitive in their own way. "I'm sorry about your mother," I said, holding her hand across the table. "She must have been an extraordinary woman to have such a strong daughter as you." I saw her eyes water, but she quickly disguised it, grabbing her soda glass. The ice was broken, not with empty words of comfort, but with mutual recognition of the pain each carried. Marianne's weekends with us became more frequent. Gradually, she opened up, bringing life and laughter to our house. She was intelligent, studious, dreamed of being a doctor, something almost unthinkable for a young woman at that time. Anthony encouraged her against the opinion of his late wife's family, who thought she should settle for being a primary school teacher, or, better yet, find a good marriage. In December 1975, we made the decision. We would live together. There was no formal marriage proposal, at least not at that moment. It was a practical arrangement, a larger apartment near my store, where the children would have more space and Marianne could finish high school at a better school in New York. We moved in early 1976. The apartment wasn't luxurious, but it had 3 bedrooms, one for us, one for the boys, and another for the girls. I remember the first night there. After the children were asleep, Anthony and I sat looking at the city lights. "Are we doing the right thing?" I asked insecurely. "We're doing the best we can," he replied, always practical. "There's no guarantee of happiness, Eleanor. There's only the certainty that we're trying with all our hearts." Living together brought challenges we didn't anticipate. Marianne and Charles had strong personalities, both territorial in their own way. They argued over the bathroom in the morning, fought about the volume of the music, quarreled over control of the television. Beatrice oscillated between idolizing Marianne and feeling jealous when the attention wasn't on her. And there were practical matters. Who would pay for what? How would we divide household chores? Who would have the final word in the education of each child? There were no manuals for families like ours, formed from pieces, glued together with hope and goodwill. But there were also moments of pure joy. Friday nights, when we made popcorn and watched a movie together. Sundays in the park, playing ball, or just talking about the week that had passed. The small traditions we created, pancakes for Sunday breakfast, thank you notes on the dinner table on Fridays, each person writing something positive that happened during the week. In March 1976, I discovered I was pregnant. We hadn't planned it. At 33, I thought my childbearing phase had passed. The news caught me by surprise, a mixture of joy and apprehension. How would the other children react? How would I manage the store with a baby? And if things didn't work out with Anthony, would I be alone again, now with 3 children? When I told Anthony, he was silent for a moment, then smiled in that calm way that was his alone. "Looks like we'll need a bigger apartment." It wasn't exactly a romantic declaration, but at that moment it was exactly what I needed to hear. The practicality, the acceptance, the willingness to move forward whatever the challenges might be. Telling the children was more complicated. Charles, then 12, was visibly disturbed. "You're not even married," he exclaimed, red with indignation. Beatrice was excited about the idea of a baby to care for, like a real doll. Marianne, surprisingly, was the most mature of all. "I think you two should get married before the baby is born," she said, as pragmatic as her father. "Not because of what others will say, but so everything is legal for the baby." And so, in May 1976, we married in a civil ceremony, a simple ceremony at the courthouse with only the children and a few close friends as witnesses. There was no white dress, no elaborate party, no honeymoon. We returned home, ordered pizza for dinner, and toasted with grape juice. Me because of the pregnancy, the children because they were children. In November 1976, our Emma was born. Small, with a dark fuzz on the top of her head and curious eyes that seemed to understand the world from the first day. The delivery was difficult. 16 hours of labor, complications that almost led me to an emergency C-section. But when I finally put her to my breast, all the pain disappeared. Charles was the first to hold her after me and Anthony. I saw something change in his eyes at that moment. A tenderness, a feeling of protection he had never shown before. "She's so small," he whispered in wonder. "I'll teach her everything when she grows up." Beatrice wanted to hold her every minute, as if Emma was really the living doll she had imagined. We had to establish strict rules, always sitting, always with an adult nearby, always with washed hands. Marianne, at first more distant, was conquered by her little sister's first smile. The first months with Emma were exhausting. The store was at its peak, with orders we could barely keep up with. Anthony had been promoted, now managing the entire East Coast region for the textile mill, which meant more travel. Beatrice caught chickenpox and transmitted it to everyone in the house except the baby, by a miracle. Charles entered adolescence with all the rebellion that age brings. There were days when I wondered if we would make it, if it hadn't been madness to try to create this patched family with its different needs, histories, and wounds, if we weren't all destined to repeat the mistakes of our parents, despite the best intentions. It was during this turbulent period, in February 1981, that I received a call that would change many things. It was a nurse from Memorial Hospital. "Are you a relative of Clara Matthews?" My heart froze. It was my mother's name. "I'm her daughter," I replied, my voice trembling. "Your mother was admitted yesterday with severe pneumonia. She asked us to call you." I hadn't spoken to my mother in over 10 years. After that fateful day, she had completely disappeared from my life. I learned, from distant relatives, that she was living in Portland with a cousin. She never tried to contact me, never asked to see her grandchildren, never showed remorse. Or at least that's what I thought. "She's very ill," continued the nurse. "The doctors don't think she'll hold on for much longer." I hung up the phone in a state of shock. All the pain, the anger, the humiliation of that day came back like a wave, suffocating me. Why would she seek me out now? What could she want after so long? Part of me wanted to ignore the call, let her pass without the comfort of forgiveness she didn't deserve. Anthony found me sitting in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, silent tears running down my face. "My mother is dying," I said simply. "At Memorial Hospital. She wants to see me." I didn't need to explain more. He knew the whole story, all the wounds still open. "What do you want to do?" he asked without judgment. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Part of me wants to go. Another part wants to pretend I never received this call. If you don't go, you might regret it later. If you go, the worst that can happen is confirming what you already know, that she doesn't deserve your forgiveness." I went the next day, alone. I didn't want the children to know, not yet. I didn't know what I would find, what I would feel, what I would say. Memorial Hospital was an intimidating labyrinth. I followed the directions to the pneumology ward, my heart beating harder and harder. When I finally reached room 305, I hesitated at the door, took a deep breath, nervously adjusted my hair, and entered. The woman in the bed looked nothing like the mother I knew. Thin to the bones, yellowish skin, her hair, once always impeccably dyed brown, now completely white and sparse. An oxygen tube in her nose, various tubes and wires connected to machines that beeped. For a moment, I thought I had entered the wrong room. Then she opened her eyes, those green eyes I had inherited, and I knew it was her. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "You came?" I stood by the door, unable to approach. "What do you want, Mother?" I asked, colder than I intended. She made a weak gesture with her hand, calling me closer. Reluctantly, I took a few steps to the edge of the bed. The smell of illness and medications was suffocating. "Forgiveness," she said simply, her eyes watering. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need to ask before I go." I felt a lump in my throat. 10 years of silence, and all she had to say was this. One word, a last-minute plea to ease her conscience. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling with contained emotion. "Why now? Why did you do that? He was my husband, Mom, the father of your grandchildren." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, I saw something I had never noticed before. A deep exhaustion, an ancient sadness that seemed to precede even what she had done to me. "I have no excuses, daughter. I was selfish, weak. After your father died, I felt so alone, so invisible. Robert saw me, made me feel desired again. It started with small compliments, seemingly innocent touches. When I realized what was happening, I had already fallen into a trap from which I couldn't escape." "You could have stopped," I retorted bitterly. "You could have thought of me, of your grandchildren." "Yes," she agreed, and the honesty of that simple statement disarmed me. "I could have. I should have. I didn't. That's the weight I carry. When you exposed us at that party, when everything came to light, Robert abandoned me 2 weeks later. He said I had ruined his life. I was alone, without family, without anyone." A violent cough interrupted her words. Her fragile body shook with the effort. Instinctively, I took the water glass from the bedside table and helped her drink. A small, automatic gesture of care that surprised me. "Where have you been all these years?" I asked when the crisis passed. "Portland, at first, then Seattle. I worked as a housekeeper, a caretaker for the elderly, whatever I could get at my age. I returned to New York 2 years ago when the money ran out. I'm in a public nursing home in the Bronx. It's not bad," she added, seeing my expression. "The nurses are kind. Why did you never try to contact me?" "Shame," she answered simply, "and fear. Fear that you would reject me, as you would have every right to do, as you still do." We remained silent for a few minutes. I observed that woman, my mother, my betrayer, and couldn't feel the anger from before. Just an immense sadness for the waste of it all. Love, trust, years that could have been shared. "I have 4 grandchildren now," I said finally. "Charles is 16, Beatrice 14. You never saw them grow up, and I have 2 more daughters. Marianne, who is my stepdaughter, is in medical school, and Emma, 4, with my second husband." I saw her eyes widen in surprise, then fill with tears. "You rebuilt your life," she murmured. "I'm happy for you, daughter." "It wasn't easy," I replied, feeling my own tears threatening to fall. "There were moments when I almost gave up." "You were always the strong one in the family," she said with a weak smile. "Stronger than me, stronger than your father. I knew you would survive, that you would rise again." We talked for another hour. I told her about the children, about Anthony, about the dressmaking business. She listened to everything with an almost hungry attention, as if trying to memorize every detail to take with her. She didn't mention Robert again, nor did she try to justify herself further. She just listened, thanked, occasionally asked a question. When I said goodbye, I promised to return the next day. I didn't know if I would be able to forgive her completely. Not yet, perhaps never. But something had changed inside me. The wound, once inflamed and painful, now seemed to finally begin to heal. My mother passed away 3 days later, during the night. I wasn't there. I had gone home to take a shower and rest a bit, planning to return in the morning. The nurse said she passed peacefully in her sleep. I organized a simple funeral. To my surprise, Charles insisted on going with me. "She was my grandmother," he said with that maturity that always impressed me, even if I didn't know her. Beatrice preferred to stay home with Emma. Marianne offered to accompany me as well, but I gently refused. That moment was just for me, and for the thin thread of reconciliation I had begun to weave with my mother in her last days. At the cemetery, as the coffin descended into the earth, Charles held my hand tightly. "Do you regret going to see her?" he asked in a low voice. "No," I replied honestly. "I haven't forgiven her completely, but I'm at peace for having tried, for having allowed her to pass, knowing that I no longer carry hatred in my heart." Back to routine, I realized that something had changed inside me. A lightness I didn't expect, as if a weight I had carried for so long had finally been lifted. It wasn't complete forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely, but it was a beginning. A few weeks after the funeral, Robert appeared at our door. He was older, more worn, his hair almost completely gray. He carried an envelope in his hand. "I heard about your mother," he said without preamble. "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. What was there to say? "My marriage ended," he continued. "Martha left me, took everything, even the house." A petty part inside me felt satisfaction, karma perhaps, but another part, the one that had begun to learn about forgiveness with my mother, felt only weariness. So much suffering, so many lives ruined or at least harmed. For what? "What do you want, Robert?" I asked directly. "I brought this," he replied, extending the envelope. "It's money, not much, but it's all I managed to save for the children." "They're not children anymore," I interrupted. "Charles is 16, finishing high school, already working with me at the factory during vacations. Beatrice is 14, a teenager now. Dreams of being a teacher. They barely remember you." He lowered his head, the envelope still extended. "I know I ruined everything, Eleanor. I'm not asking to return to their lives or yours. I just wanted to do something right at least once." I looked at that man, my first love, my greatest disappointment, and felt a confused mixture of emotions. Not love, not anymore, not hatred, not anymore. Just a kind of weary compassion. "Keep your money," I said finally. "If you want to do something for your children, start by being present. Not every day, not like before. That's past. But maybe one Sunday a month, a card on their birthday. Small gestures that show you care, that they weren't forgotten." He nodded, putting away the envelope. "I can try," he said. And there was a humility in his voice I had never heard before. "I'll ask them if they want to see you," I said. "The decision is theirs now, not mine." When I told Charles and Beatrice about their father's visit, their reactions were completely opposite. Charles absolutely refused to see him. "He had years to be my father," he said with the contained anger he always carried. "Now I don't need him anymore." Beatrice, always more emotional, more willing to forgive, wanted to give him a chance. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mom," she argued. "Didn't you give one to Grandma?" That comment caught me by surprise. I didn't know she was aware of the reconciliation with my mother. Children perceive much more than we imagine. Robert began visiting Beatrice occasionally. At first, they were awkward, embarrassing encounters, two people who were connected by blood, but strangers in everything else. With time, they developed a fragile, limited, but real relationship. He never became the father he should have been, but at least he was there in some form. Charles maintained his position, refused to see his father, to accept anything from him. He concentrated all his energy on studies and work at the factory, as if he wanted to prove he could be successful without the father figure who had abandoned him. The years passed. Our dressmaking business, New Dawn, grew steadily. In 1982, we opened a second unit, a small warehouse in New Jersey. By 1984, we had 30 employees and supplied boutiques throughout the New York metropolitan area. Charles, with a degree in business administration, took over the financial and expansion area of the business. Beatrice followed the path of education, became a teacher, and taught at a public school in Queens. Marianne realized her dream, became a doctor specializing in pediatrics. And our little Emma grew up, surrounded by the love of a family that, although unconventional, was solid and true. In 1985, Robert became seriously ill, lung cancer resulting from decades of cigarettes and alcohol. Beatrice called me from the hospital in tears. "He has no one, Mom," she said, her voice choked. "Do you think we can help in some way?" I took a deep breath. After everything, after so long, I still found myself linked to that man by an invisible thread of responsibility, not out of love or obligation, but out of something deeper. Perhaps the understanding that all of us, no matter how much we err, deserve dignity. In the end, Anthony and I talked about what we could do. With his usual generosity, he was the first to suggest that we help with medical expenses, that we organize so Robert wouldn't be alone in the hospital. Not for him, Anthony explained, but for you, so you don't carry the weight of having denied help when you could offer it. Beatrice visited her father daily. I went twice a week, bringing home-cooked food that he rarely managed to eat, but appreciated the gesture. Marianne, as a doctor, helped ensure he received the best possible treatment. Charles, after much reluctance, went to visit him once. "I'm not going to pretend everything is okay between us," he said to Robert, direct as always. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for my mother and my sister, who suffer seeing you like this." Robert died in October 1985 on a cold, rainy day. He was alone at the time. Beatrice had gone out to get coffee. I was at work. The nurse said it was quick, without suffering. At the funeral, much more crowded than my mother's, I reflected on the strange paths life takes. How that man who was once the center of my world had become almost a stranger. How that betrayal I thought would destroy me ended up being the catalyst for a much better life than I would have had with him. As I threw a handful of earth onto the coffin, I whispered a silent goodbye. Not to the Robert who betrayed me, but to the young man I fell in love with at 19, to the father of my 2 older children, to the person who, despite all his mistakes, had been an important part of my story. Beside me, Anthony held my hand firmly. His eyes, always so calm and wise, met mine. We didn't need words. He understood, as he always had, the complex meanderings of the human heart. Back home, with the family gathered for a quiet dinner, I looked around the table. Charles, now a grown man, serious and responsible. Beatrice, with her sensitivity and compassion. Marianne, brilliant and determined. Emma, growing up surrounded by love and stability that her older siblings didn't have. And Anthony, my safe harbor, my journey companion. I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost choked me. Not for the pain, not for the betrayals, not for the losses, but for what came after, for the strength I discovered in myself, for the bonds we created, not out of obligation or blood, but through daily choice, through conscious love. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat on the balcony with Anthony, as we had so many times before. The city sparkled in the distance, thousands of lights in the darkness. "I'm at peace," I said, realizing the truth in it the moment the words left my mouth. "I didn't think it would be possible, but I am." He smiled, that calm smile that had been my anchor for so many years. "Forgiveness isn't for others, Eleanor," he said softly. "It's a gift we give ourselves." And he was right, as he almost always was. Forgiveness, to my mother, to Robert, perhaps even to myself for all the times I doubted, almost gave up, didn't erase the past, didn't make the scars disappear, but it allowed me to look ahead, to fully live the present, to build the future without the constant weight of hurt and resentment. Looking back now, with the wisdom that only years bring, I realize that was one of the most valuable lessons of my life. The capacity to forgive isn't weakness, it's strength. It's not forgetting, it's remembering without pain. It's not approving what was done, it's freeing yourself from the power it has over you. Life would continue with its ups and downs. There would still be challenges, losses, moments of doubt. But something fundamental had changed inside me, like a broken bone that, after healing, becomes stronger at the sight of the fracture. My heart, so often broken, had reassembled itself with a new resilience. The 90s arrived with winds of change for America and for our family. The internet was becoming mainstream, the economy was booming, and a new generation of Americans was growing up with ambitions and possibilities that my generation never dreamed of having. By 1990, our dressmaking business, New Dawn, was no longer just a small family company. We had 3 factories in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, employing more than 200 people, mostly women. Our exports reached all of North America and were beginning to arrive in the United Kingdom and France. Our network of our own stores had 7 units in the main malls of New York City. Looking back at that young widow of 27, with 2 small children and a single Singer sewing machine, I could hardly believe the journey we had traveled. It wasn't easy, It wasn't quick, it wasn't without stumbles, but each obstacle overcome, each sleepless night working, each calculated risk we took brought us here. Charles, at 26, had become the financial director and head of international expansion for the company. He graduated in business administration from NYU, specialized in foreign trade, and brought to the business a modern vision that complemented my practical experience. Tall like his father, but with my green eyes, he had become a serious, determined man, respected in the market. He married young at 24 to Ana Lucia, an economist he met in college. In 1988, they gave me my first grandson, Peter, followed by Ryan in 1990. The first time I held Peter in my arms, an emotion different from anything I had ever felt flooded me. It wasn't just the love of a mother that I knew well. It was something broader, more encompassing, the sensation of continuity, that life followed its cycle despite all the pain, all the losses. That baby, with curious eyes that reminded me of the grandfather he would never know, represented the promise that our story would continue far beyond ourselves. Beatrice followed a completely different path, as I always knew she would. She graduated in literature from Columbia University. She became a teacher at a public school in Queens, where she lived. At 24, she met Louis, an idealistic architect who worked with affordable housing. They married in a simple ceremony in the backyard of the house they were renovating together. In 1992, Maria Claire was born, my first granddaughter, who from the cradle showed the same dreamy spirit as her mother. Marianne completed medical school with honors in 1985, specialized in pediatrics, and opened a community clinic in the South Bronx. She married a fellow doctor, Paul, and they opted not to have biological children. Instead, they adopted two siblings, John and Carla, who had lost their parents in an accident. Anthony cried on the day of the adoption, moved to see his daughter follow such a generous path. Our Emma, the youngest, grew up in an already established family, surrounded by love and stability that her older siblings didn't have in their early years. Communicative, outgoing, passionate about arts and fashion from an early age, she always showed interest in the family business, but from a creative perspective. At 14, in 1990, she was already designing models that impressed our professional stylists. Anthony and I celebrated 15 years together in 1991. He had retired from the textile mill the previous year after 35 years of service and now dedicated himself to small pleasures, cultivating a garden in the house we bought in Connecticut, cooking elaborate dishes on weekends, playing with the grandchildren, reading all the books he didn't have time to read during his professional life. Our routine had found a tranquil rhythm after so many years of struggle and sacrifice. I still went to the company every day, but no longer involved myself in daily operations. My role now was more of a mentor, a guardian of the vision and values that had built New Dawn. The day-to-day decisions were left to Charles and the team of managers we had formed over the years. In 1995, with the stability of the American economy, we decided to take a bold step, opening a concept store on Fifth Avenue, presenting more sophisticated collections signed by Emma, who at 19 already demonstrated extraordinary talent for fashion design. The inauguration was an event that brought together the press, loyal customers, and even some celebrities. Seeing the New Dawn name in the spotlight, seeing my youngest daughter's creations admired by everyone, filled my heart with a pride that barely fit in my chest. That night, after all the guests had left, I stayed alone in the store for a few minutes. I walked among the elegant mannequins, touched the fine fabrics, observed the careful details of each piece. I remembered my first sewing machine, the nights staying up late sewing at the kitchen table, the first pieces sold at Mrs. Helen's store. How much had changed, and yet the essence remained the same, creating beauty from the simple, transforming dreams into tangible reality. Charles expanded our international operations, opening an office in London to facilitate entry into the European market. Beatrice, besides teaching, began writing children's books in her spare time. Small stories about different families, about new beginnings, about courage that were successful in schools where they were adopted. One of them, The Patched Family, clearly inspired by our own story, won an important Children's Literature Award. In 1998, New Dawn was nominated as one of the most innovative companies in the American textile sector by the American Textile Industry Association. I received the award in a glamorous ceremony in New York, wearing, of course, an exclusive creation by Emma. I remember looking at the audience while giving my thank you speech and seeing my entire family, children, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, grandchildren, applauding standing. Anthony, always discreet, smiled with that silent pride that was his alone. "This award," I said into the microphone, my voice choked with emotion, "is not just mine. It belongs to every woman who stood by my side when I started with a single sewing machine in a small room. It belongs to every customer who trusted our quality when we were just an unknown name. It belongs to my family who believed in my dreams even when they seemed impossible." At the party after the award, a young journalist asked me what had been the secret to my success. I thought for a moment before answering. "There is no secret," I said finally. "There is hard work, persistence, and the ability to transform difficulties into opportunities. But above all, there is the understanding that success in business means nothing if it isn't accompanied by success in human relationships. The true legacy isn't the stores, the factories, or the awards. It's the lives we touch, the people we help grow, the family we build." The new millennium brought new challenges and changes. In 2001, at 58, I decided it was time to pass the baton. Charles took over the presidency of the group, which now also included an accessories brand and a children's line. Emma became creative director of all brands. We set up an administrative council, of which I was a part, but without involvement in daily operations. It was a carefully planned transition, without trauma or power disputes, as we so often see in family businesses. I had prepared my children not just to manage a business, but to work together, respecting each other's strengths and weaknesses. With free time, Anthony and I began to travel, something we always postponed during the years of building the company and raising the children. We visited Paris, Rome, Barcelona. We spent an entire month traveling through small towns in the Italian countryside, seeking his family's roots. We visited Anthony's children from his first marriage in California, meeting grandchildren we had only seen in photographs until then. Those were golden years, years of harvest after so much planting, years of contemplation after so much action, years of gratitude after so much struggle. In 2005, Anthony began showing the first symptoms of what would later be diagnosed as Alzheimer's. At first, they were just small forgetfulness, occasional confusion. Over time, they became more frequent, more serious. The disease progressed slowly, giving us time to adapt, to say goodbye little by little. Anthony, always practical, organized all his documents, wrote letters to each child and grandchild, prepared for the inevitable with the same dignity with which he lived his entire life. "Don't feel sorry for me," he would tell me in moments of lucidity that became increasingly rare. "We had a good life together, Eleanor, better than many have in 100 years of existence." By 2010, he no longer recognized me consistently. Sometimes I was his wife, other times a kind nurse or a childhood friend. I learned to enter his world, not to correct him, to find small joys in moments of connection, however brief they might be. It was Emma who suggested I write our memories. "Not to publish, Mom," she explained, "to preserve. So your grandchildren and great-grandchildren know your story, understand where they came from." I began writing during the long afternoons, while Anthony napped. First just facts and dates, then feelings, reflections, lessons learned. The process was therapeutic, helping me find meaning in the journey, to see patterns where before I saw only random events. Anthony passed away on a quiet spring morning in 2012 in our house in Connecticut, with the sound of birds coming through the open window. I held his hand until the last breath, silently thanking him for the 37 years we shared. They weren't perfect years. Real life never is, but they were authentic, honest, lived with purpose and love. The funeral was a celebration of life, not just a lament for death. Children, grandchildren, friends, former employees of the company all came to pay their respects to the calm and wise man who had touched so many lives in subtle but profound ways. Charles gave an emotional speech. "My biological father gave me life, but it was Anthony who taught me to live it with integrity." Beatrice read a poem she had written especially for the occasion about second chances and chosen love. Marianne, always more reserved, simply hugged me tightly and whispered, "He was the best father I could have chosen." And Emma, our daughter together, placed on the coffin a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the garden he loved so much, saying only, "See you later, Dad. Save a place for all of us." In the years that followed, I rediscovered myself as a woman alone again, but in circumstances so different from that first time. No longer young, frightened, and desperate, but mature, established, surrounded by a loving family and a solid legacy. The longing for Anthony was constant, but not paralyzing. It was more like a familiar company, a reminder of all we had, not just what I had lost. I remained involved with the company as honorary president, participating in strategic decisions, advising when requested, but never interfering in my children's management. New Dawn continued to grow and adapt to the new times: e-commerce, sustainability, social responsibility. In 2015, at 72, I made another important decision to create a foundation. Using part of the dividends I still received from the company, I established the New Dawn Foundation, focused on empowering women in vulnerable situations through professional training courses, especially in sewing and design. Our first headquarters was in the South Bronx, one of the poorest areas of New York. We started small, 2 rooms, 10 sewing machines, 1 teacher. In the first year, we trained 20 women. In the second, 50. In the third, we expanded to 3 different communities, adding courses in entrepreneurship, personal finance, and digital marketing. Seeing those women, many of them single mothers as I had been, finding financial independence and self-esteem through work constantly reminds me of my own beginning. The Eleanor of 27, with 2 small children, a Singer sewing machine, and dreams bigger than her possibilities. One afternoon in 2018, while visiting the training center in the Bronx, a young woman of about 25 approached me, holding the hand of a girl of approximately 5 years. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said shyly, "I wanted to thank you personally. This course changed my life. I got a job. Now I can support my daughter without depending on anyone." Her eyes shone with contained tears, and in them I saw the reflection of my own story. I saw the same determination, the same desire to overcome circumstances, to build something better for herself and for the next generation. "What's your name, dear?" I asked, moved. "Maria," she replied. "And this is my daughter, Hope." Hope, what a more appropriate name, because in the end, that's what moved me throughout my entire journey. Not just hope for myself, but for my children, for the women we employed, for the families who depended on us. At 75, in 2018, I received another recognition I never imagined, the title of Honorary Doctor from Columbia University for my contribution to female entrepreneurship and corporate social responsibility. In the solemn ceremony, surrounded by academics in their robes, I felt a pang of irony. I, who barely finished high school, now received the highest university honor. During my acceptance speech, I shared what I consider the most valuable lesson of my life. Adversity has the curious power of revealing our true talents and strengths. When we lose everything, when the ground disappears beneath our feet, we discover resources within us that we didn't know existed. We discover that we can endure the unbearable, that we can rebuild from the ashes, that we can transform our deepest wounds into sources of wisdom and compassion. Today, at 78, I look back and see a life that, despite all the pain, all the challenges, was lived fully. I see a family I built not just with blood, but with daily choices of love and forgiveness. I see a business that grew from an improvised room to a nationally respected company. I see the hundreds of women we employed over the years, the thousands we dressed with our clothes, the dozens we now train through the foundation. It's not a perfect story. There are chapters that, if I could, I would rewrite. Decisions I would make differently, words I would or wouldn't say, but it's a story of overcoming, of reconstruction, of transforming the ashes of betrayal and abandonment into something beautiful and lasting. My grandchildren are now grown. Some have already given me great-grandchildren. In the family gatherings we still religiously hold every month, I look around and can hardly believe the leafy tree that grew from that broken seed. Different people, with distinct personalities, talents, and dreams, but united by bonds that go beyond blood. Bonds of choice, of respect, of shared history. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, I think of Robert and my mother, not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of serene understanding that only time can bring. They too are part of this story, in their way. Their choices, however painful they may have been, ended up putting me on the path that brought me here. When my granddaughters ask me what the secret to a happy life is, I always answer, "My child, it's understanding that after the strongest storm, the sun always shines again. It's knowing that our worth isn't defined by who hurt us, but by how we choose to move forward. It's having the courage to forgive, not for who hurt us, but for our own peace. And above all, it's realizing that family isn't just who shares our blood, but who shares our journey, who chooses to stay when it would be easier to leave. This is my story, a story of falls and new beginnings, of wounds and scars, of losses and gains. A story that began with the cruelest words I've ever heard. Your mother kisses better than you. But that didn't end there, that refused to end there, that continued, page after page, chapter after chapter, until transforming into something I can now look at with peace in my heart and say, it was worth it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and fear. It was worth it because it brought me here, to this moment, to this person I've become. And if there's one lesson I would like to leave for all who hear my story, it's this. Don't allow the worst thing that happened to you to become the definition of who you are. Use it, yes, as fertilizer to grow, to move forward, but never as a permanent identity, because we are all much more than our wounds. We are the beauty we create from them. My dears, we've reached the end of this journey I've shared with you. I thank each one of you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying me, for being moved with me, for reflecting on your own life through mine. If this story touched you in some way, please leave your like, share it with someone who might need to hear a story of overcoming, and subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel for more life stories. Each shared experience is a bridge that connects us, that reminds us we're not alone in our struggles and joys. Until next time, God willing. A tight hug from this grandma who already considers you part of the family.